Now we have someone from remote, Ilsa Godlovitch. She should be there. The director of the Brussels office of WIK Consult. Welcome, Ilsa Godlovitch. Can you hear us?
Thank you. Yes, I can hear you.
Fine. Nice to see you. So we are here to listen from you. I mean, your vision about 5G and where are we now at the moment with 5G in Europe? Please.
Well, I'll start by asking the question, where are we at? And the answer is, apparently, according to the numbers, we're not doing too badly. So even as of the end of 2022, there was more than 80% coverage of 5G. In fact, even at that time, apparently Italy had 100% or nearly 100% coverage of 5G. Most studies suggest that by 2025, there will be nearly 100% coverage of 5G across Europe. However, what we have also seen is that there's been rather limited deployment of what we might call full 5G, by which I would mean standalone 5G with the use of higher frequency spectrum bands. So 5G that really offers all the capacity that was promised when it was standardized. In fact, in a recent report I've seen, there are only 10 operational 5G standalone networks in Europe at the moment. The other thing to note is, okay, we're meant to have 5G in theory, but in practice, the actual experience of users hasn't changed very much. So if you look at data, for example, from OpenSignal, apparently there was only a speed increase of just over 7 megabits per second for mobile broadband on average across Europe from 2022 to 2023. And this was meant to be a period of widespread 5G deployment. I've also seen, this is somewhat surprising, that if you look at what users experience, despite the fact that there's theoretical availability of 5G, even users who have 5G-enabled handsets find that 5G is not actually available a lot of the time. This is what we can see from some OpenSignal reports. The 5G download speeds also really vary widely across Europe. So what do we really mean by 5G? Apparently in Poland, if you're on 5G, you get an average of 75 megabits per second. Whereas in Denmark, it can be up to 300 megabits per second. In Italy, by the way, the speeds that they measured were just over 132 megabits per second. That's as far as consumers can see. The other big promise of 5G was that it would offer specialized services for businesses. But we've conducted a number of studies, and what we've repeatedly seen is that these aren't really emerging or not in the way that they were predicted. And there seems to be quite limited demand for quality assured mobile for specific business use cases. That's at least what we found when we interviewed business users. So in short, the answer is, well, in theory, we're doing great. In practice, not much has changed.
But why is full 5G not there yet? I mean, the true 5G is not there yet.
Well, I mean, a lot of reasons have been given, and I'm not sure that they're all, well, they all provide part of the answer, but certainly not the whole answer. Of course, one of the reasons could be late spectrum awards, but that's really only part of the answer because we know that even 2 years ago, the end of 2022, nearly all countries had assigned the 700 megahertz band. Most countries had also assigned a large part of the 3.5 gigahertz band. So in theory, at least, mobile operators should have had the opportunity to deploy the networks further and engage in network densification. Another reason that I've heard, I'm not quite sure it provides the answer either, is that regulation might be stopping this deployment. So there was an argument that open internet regulations, for example, limited the incentive because they created regulatory uncertainty. But in a study that we conducted on implementation of those regulations, we concluded that 5G network slicing, for example, was fully compatible with EU law. It doesn't seem to me that if you really need network slicing to achieve a specific specialized service on 5G, that regulation would stop that. I think it's more likely to be other reasons. So what about the demand issue? I think we're getting closer when we look at the issue of demand. Is there really demand for it? One, I think, important thing that perhaps wasn't fully considered is that when you look at all the services that are meant to be offered over 5G, do they really need 5G? Or could they be delivered over a fiber network or even other fixed networks with Wi-Fi? Could they be delivered over a private network rather than a public mobile network? What about low power, wide area networks which use license-free spectrum? Apparently, NB-IoT and LTE-M are expected to account for 40% of IoT connections in 2027. So how many services that were meant to be 5G enabled really require 5G? The other thing we found is that even if there are some services that might appear attractive, when you speak to businesses, end users, they don't always find that the benefits exceed the cost. So they seem to be quite concerned about the cost of those services compared with other alternatives that might be less quality assured, but perhaps significantly cheaper. There's also a fear of lock-in, fear of reliance on your supplier if you engage with a specific MNO on a business-critical product. And I'll ask another question in this regard. I know that 5G allows you to watch high-definition video on your mobile phone, but do consumers really want to do that? I mean, demand, I think, is a large, or lack of demand is a large part of the answer. There's another part of the answer, at least for consumers. How do they know that the mobile network or the one mobile network is offering 5G or has been densified and can offer higher speeds? There's no kind of transparency for consumers about what they're receiving. I mean, as I said, it can say 5G, and that can mean anything from 75 megabits per second through to 300 megabits per second. So how are they meant to know? And equally, if they don't know, what's going to incentivize a mobile operator to increase the quality of its network if somebody else could not increase it and still offer 5G? I think there are other issues like mobile network operators having other priorities. They might also be engaged in deploying fiber, for example. And there's not actually any real obligation or even target for anybody to roll out 5G. It's not in the digital decade targets. It only says quality equivalent to 5G, but it doesn't say what that means, say what 5G means. And many spectrum licenses also don't say specifically that there must be a certain quality of service achieved.
So what has been achieved? What has been achieved in terms of results from 5G?
Well, there have been some achievements. It hasn't been nothing. I think one thing that perhaps turned out to be a bit of a surprise is how popular private networks have been in this regard. And in particular in countries where spectrum was granted directly to businesses, and Germany is an example of this, there have been quite a few private campus networks that have been developed, and those are typically standalone networks. And you might wonder why, when you grant spectrum directly to companies, it gives them a feeling of control over that spectrum. It allows them to partner with different players. It might be a mobile operator, it often is, but it also might not be. They might partner directly with an equipment manufacturer or an MVNO. It gives them a lot more options than if the spectrum is only made available to an MNO, for example. And this is something that we observed in a study that we conducted for BEREC. The only other thing I can say that's perhaps positive is that actually if we had more densified 5G networks, maybe the environmental impact would have been worse. 5G is meant to be overall more energy efficient for a given amount of bandwidth used, but I've also seen studies that suggest that when you densify the network and you use higher frequency bands, that can also result in more energy consumption. So I guess that's an unintended side effect of not going as fast as perhaps people wanted to in the deployment of full 5G.
A last question. What can the Commission do to improve the outlook for 5G, especially in the next Commission, let's say, after the elections?
Well, let's let's look at what they have proposed. So if we look at the DNA white paper, that sets out a blueprint, I think, for what the Commission is intending to do. And they propose to, essentially, they propose greater harmonization. They ask for greater harmonization of spectrum management, coordinated timing of auctions. They suggest that EU law should include some spectrum roadmap towards 6G. They propose a notification process, including a binding review decision. So today, when individual countries make a decision, it's their decision to make. They can receive comments, but there's nobody that can tell them to change that decision. The Commission is proposing to have a more of a binding role in reviewing and asking for changes to be made. Well, what do I think about that? There's a lot about competencies. So there's an awful lot about who should have responsibility and the idea of setting out targets. I'm not saying this is necessarily wrong, but what I don't see so much is the concrete actions that would help. And I think a very important action is defining 6G. What is it? So we've seen that 5G can mean many, many different things. Perhaps with 6G we should be clearer about what it is. Perhaps we should have clearer and firmer objectives in the standardization process. We should define it in a way that meets societal environmental needs. And also, really importantly, we should find out what people need. Businesses, for example, there needs to be a lot of engagement. If there's a problem of demand from 5G, we need to address that with the specification of 6G and make sure it really addresses user needs. So having a roadmap for 6G is important, but it's not the only thing. Obviously, spectrum will need to be made available, but something else I think we've learned is that when it comes to license conditions for spectrum, they need to include certain principles. So if we have defined 6G in a certain way and it needs to meet certain requirements and standards, those should also be embedded in the license conditions. What do we expect from the people who receive spectrum that can be used for 6G? There are also some countries, including, I think, Norway and France, where there are obligations in licenses for mobile network operators to meet requests for specific services, including specialized services. Perhaps there should also be some consideration of how to involve non-mobile operators in this process. So again, consideration of allocating directly to businesses, looking at possibly leasing obligations within spectrum license. In France, I think in Norway too, basically, the mobile network operator is expected to meet reasonable demands for specialized service, and if that can't be supplied, then an alternative has to be offered, like leasing, for example. Perhaps this is something that could be more generalized. Last but not least, the final point that I will make, transparency. Nobody is going to have an incentive to either develop or to buy 6G if they don't know what it is. So there needs to be some kind of mechanism to label products, in particular mobile products, so you know what you are getting. This is already the case for fixed broadband, and there are rules around how you can market it, what you can call fiber or not fiber, the bandwidth that you offer. And this doesn't exist in mobile. It's not too late even to start that today. For 5G, certainly by the time we reach 6G, it should be evident to consumers and businesses what they are buying.
Thanks a lot, Ilsa Godlovitch, for your contribution, and we take care of that, and we're going to keep it in mind for the discussion here. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you for
very
inviting
much.
me.
Bye-bye.